as we continue our verse-by-verse study through this book, quickly approaching the end here. And as I've said, next Sunday we'll be looking forward to having Brent and Michelle Howard with us, both for the Family Bible Hour and for the Sunday morning service time. So just keep that in mind as well. And we'll look forward to hearing an update from their ministry. So we'll take a 1-week pause through our study and then right back into it as we continue finishing up here through the end very soon. But here in Revelation chapter 21, we are well past now the tribulation period of time, that 7-year literal period where God is going to do two things. He's going to restore Israel to himself and be working in that way, and also cast judgment and bring punishment on an unbelieving world. And he is working also in salvation during that time as well, not only with Israel, but also with Gentile people. Ultimately, then, that leads to a 1,000-year millennial kingdom, and we've been talking about that. And that literal 1,000-year period, we shouldn't tend to look at that as being symbolic. I think we can take Scripture for what it means, a literal 1,000-year period, at which point in time this final sort of rebellion for those who are born during that millennial period will be put down ultimately by God, and Satan and death and everything else, all unbelievers of any age of all time, are cast into the lake of fire at what's called the Great White Throne Judgment, which then leads us into eternity, the new heavens and the new earth. And we've started to look at some of what that means and some of what that is looked like in the beginning part of chapter 21. It starts out in verse 1, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. So we know that we're getting something which is new, and we talked about how that really seems to be from here, and also what we see in 2 Peter, this thought that it's completely new. It's not just renovated, but it's completely new in every way, unlike anything we can imagine. It also says there's no more sea. And then he sees, John, this holy city, which is called here the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven. And this is really the capital city of eternity. This New Jerusalem, where we are going to, I believe, call home, where we're going to dwell and spend most of our time. We talked a little bit last week. I think we'll still spend time going out, exploring this new earth, and not only the new earth, but the new heavens as well that God has created for us. But this city, this New Jerusalem, will certainly be home. And so we are not given much in Scripture in regards to what the new heavens and new earth as a whole will look like, or all of what we will do. But we are given much more description in terms of what this city is going to be. And ultimately, that's what we pick up in verse 9. Now, I did talk about a bit of an interpretation difference from even some of my dispensational forefathers in this regard. Some view verse 9 here of chapter 21 as going back, recapitulating the millennial period, and saying this is what this New Jerusalem is going to be like in the millennial kingdom, and it's this satellite city sort of hovering over the earth kind of thing. But that really does not match with the flow of the text, and it is nowhere explicitly stated here in the text. So what we're viewing as we view verse 9 through the end of the book is eternity. It's the new heavens. It's the new earth. This is the description of what this city is going to look like as we anticipate eternity. And so there are so many things that are described for us here that we can't even imagine. We do our best in our finite thinking and in terms of our interpretation of things today to understand what this is. But we have to just realize this as we read through this passage, as we look at this text. There is so much that we have no idea what it will be like. Again, talking about how Paul talks about now we see as dimly in a mirror. We don't see the full effect. We don't see the full picture. But when we finally see Christ face to face, all will be revealed. And speaking, I think, of this time. And so there's so much in the way of things being new that even now we can't really fathom. But it's interesting, though, as we talk about what is new, and here I have this talking about our future home, our new home, we always tend to seem to struggle with the concept of things being new and kind of what we have to go through for things being new. You know, this year we're celebrating our 10th year in this church building. The church has been in existence for over 200 years now, but we are 10 years in this church building. And I'm curious here, how many of you, raise of hands, were in the old church building at Bennett's Corners Road? Raise your hand if you've ever been in that old church building. Okay, put your hands down. Raise your hand if you've only ever been in this church building. Oh, it's like an even split, I feel like, pretty close there. Certainly, you can tell even in 10 years how time has changed. So for many of you, thinking back to, this old church building, what did it look like and what moved us here? And I thought it'd be interesting in terms of this and looking at our new home to even think about briefly here, where we came from here. Because it was the collapse of that church building which really led to the move up here and God's working through all of these other things. And even to this day, there's still talk that, some people went up there and were sawing off headers and that kind of thing. Not really, that didn't happen. It was the snow, as we're accustomed to. But this is what it looked like, the old church building, all caved in and collapsed and everything. This was even before my time of coming here to the church that this happened. But I don't think that anybody who would look at that picture would say that they're not pleased with what new thing God has given us here. I don't think too many people would look at that and say, yeah, I think we could probably still fit a pulpit on top of the roof pile that collapsed under the wreath, and we might still be able to fit a couple people in there, and maybe we can still salvage a balcony or something. And no, we want to do that, right? It's destroyed. So obviously there's something new that was coming, something new, something hopefully even better. And look where we are now, right? God has certainly blessed us. Our people have been faithful through that process, and here we are today. And so as we think about this new home, as we think about this new city, as we think about eternity, we come from it from this perspective of not that which should be scary to us, not that which should be, I don't want change, or I don't want it to be different, but an excitement that we're looking forward to something which is new. This is what he has set us up for here, talking about the things that have passed away before this. Where he says in verse 4, God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. The setup for this new city, the setup for eternity, is all of those former hardships, all of those former things, all of the sin-cursed effects of the world will be gone in eternity. And so there's nothing to not be excited about as we look forward to what is in store for us forever and ever, age upon age. And so we come here to verse 9, and we begin to get some more specific details about what this new home is going to look like. Let's go ahead and read in verse 9. It says, Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls filled with the 7 last plagues came to me and talked with me, saying, Come, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain. He showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Also she had a great and high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates, and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west. We'll stop right there for now. But what we're going to begin to see in this New Jerusalem are several different characteristics. And the first that's interesting to note, we see in verse 9, where judgment ultimately is going to lead way to glory. Judgment will lead way to glory. Again, note what it says in verse 9. It says, One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls filled with the 7 last plagues came to me and talked with me, saying, Come, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. I find this such an interesting point, that we go back to one of these angels whose job it was to deliver one of those last bowl judgments, one of those final harsh plagues that are cast down on the earth and sort of punishing and wiping out much of humanity during that tribulation period in time. But here, that same angel who had that job to deliver one of those bowls now is showing John this new city. He's showing John this new Jerusalem. And I don't think it's an accident that this angel is the one who's tasked with doing that, because we view him not only in his judgment role, but we also view him here in his glory role, that he is showing this new home. He's showing this new city. He is showing this great thing which God has prepared for those who love him, which is going to be forever and forever. And so I think we're reminded here that judgment ultimately is going to lead way to glory. There has to be some quote-unquote bad to get to the good. And we think in this day and age now, in this culture in which we live, and it is so sin-ridden and sin-cursed, we think, well, it's hard for us to see what God is doing. It's hard for us to look ahead and see the glory which is to come, to see the good which is to come, to see the blessings which are to come. But we know that there has to be some judgment. There ultimately has to be that punishing of sin. There ultimately has to be that great white throne judgment. There has to be these tribulation plagues and these bowls and the trumpets and the seals poured out on an unbelieving people to set up for eternity, for these new heavens and these new earth. We talked about it last week and the week before in talking about that great white throne judgment. There will not be anybody in the new heavens and new earth in eternity that's not supposed to be there. In terms of no one's going to sneak by. No sinner is going to go unnoticed and say, oh, I made it. I got one. I pulled one over on God. Only those who love God, only those who look forward to His coming, only those who are ready for God to tabernacle with us, who have faith in God through Jesus Christ, only those are the ones who will ultimately inhabit the New Jerusalem. And judgment comes leading up to that. That's why we have the tribulation. That's why we have these different judgments, the sheep and goat judgment. That's why we have that great white throne judgment, because there has to be judgment before we can get to what we have in eternity. And so that principle can't be separated from what is to come. We've talked about this many times throughout this study, the popularity of trying to remove anything which is negative, the popularity of trying to remove judgment, the popularity of trying to remove the wrathfulness, the holiness of God. Well, it is needed and it is necessary, not only in being true with who God is and His holiness, but also ultimately in setting up the promise that is in store for eternity, where there is no more death, where there is no more sorrow, where there is no more crime, for the former things have passed away. And they've passed away because God has created new and because He has judged that which was before. And so judgment ultimately leads way to glory. I think, too, just as a kind of a side principle here for us, we see this ultimately in our own lives as well. You know, there is not for us, as we endure sufferings and trials, there is not a single one of us who's living the quote-unquote perfect life, where it's just always smooth going, it's always easy, nothing ever hard happens to us, it's just not perfect. Christian life is easy, no problem, piece of cake. It's tough, it's difficult. It's filled with trial. It's filled with a proving period. But what is God doing through those difficulties? What's He doing through those trials? What's He doing through those aspects of our life? He's making us more like Himself. He's preparing us. He's leading us to more obedience. He's giving us character, as James talks about. He's preserving us. We have to deal with those trials and those sufferings. We have to deal with some of those punishments, those chastisements from God, to have the ultimate result, what we're looking for in our character and our obedience to Him. So it's not only true of us personally, but also we see it true from a wider perspective and even in view of eternity, this judgment leading way to glory. We also see in the second part of that verse the description of the inhabitants who are there. It says that one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls filled with the seven last plagues came to me and talked with me, saying, "Come, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife." Now, we're going to see a little bit more talking about this here in just a few minutes, but this has been a confusing statement for a lot of people. And I have my own interpretation, which, again, I know there are many that would take a different view and a different interpretation than me. But what I see this is very simply just the coming together of all different nations and all different sort of dispensations in terms of eternity. That we're just talking about those who are going to dwell and live in eternity in this new heavens and new earth. This angel is showing John what's coming. He's showing him this place where believers are going to live. And he says, "Come, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife." Now, this gets confusing for us because up to this point in time, whenever we are talking about the bride, we're typically referring to what? The church. But certainly we are not the only ones who are going to inhabit this place. Otherwise, what's happened to all of Israel? What's happened to all that we've seen so far in the restoration of Israel and how God continues to work? And then later on, we see that Israel is named in the gates that are going to be a part of this city. So Israel is not removed. We, again, are not talking about this replacement theology where Israel and the church are now one and the same. But I think ultimately what is happening here is that even in the distinctions, the focus is very simple, is that now all believers are referred to as the bride of the Lamb. He's referring not only to the aspects of the church and how the church has been described, but to all the blessings that all believers of all time will have. And I think here it's just a simple description of him saying that, look, I'm going to show you the bride. I'm going to show you the place where all believers dwell. But we know that the bride is much more than a place. He's not just talking about the city. And some would view that and say that he uses the term bride, the Lamb's wife, in talking just about the city itself. This imagery of the bride coming down the aisles. We see this bride coming out of heaven, and it's adorned very beautifully. And certainly we have those physical descriptions of the beauty of this city, which we'll read here in a few moments. But I think it goes far beyond just the physical attributes, and it goes to who will live there, who will dwell in this place. And so it's not just the church, it is not just Israel, it is all believers sharing all of these wonderful characteristics. It's not to say that we've all just become somehow the same, because we still see distinctions even made. We have nations talked about, we have Israel talked about, we have apostles talked about, so there still seems to be distinctions even in the new heavens and the new earth. But the focus here is this, is that now we are all rightly God's people. We are all home. We are all living and dwelling with God. Before this, where it talks about how God will tabernacle among us in this new heavens and new earth, he's not just tabernacling with Israel. He's not just going to tabernacle with his church. He's going to tabernacle with all of his people. And so here I think the description of this bride, the Lamb's wife, is a reference to the inhabitants of all of eternity. It goes on, it says in verse 10, he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Here in these verses we get the sense of the builder, which is God, and the glory which comes from is God. It's funny how they go up to this high mountain, and it gives you the expanse of how large this place is going to be, and we'll get to that here next. But it's going to be massive, and it's clearly given to us by God. It's coming down from heaven, as we saw even earlier last week, where it's descending out of heaven from God. God has created this for us. He's made this for us. He is the architect behind it. And also it goes on and it talks about the glory of God in verse 11, which is shining through. And we'll see that even later on in verse 22 and following in a couple of weeks. The glory of God permeating this place. God is going to be there with us. He will tabernacle with us. He will dwell among us. He will be there with us forever and ever and ever and ever. The fear of him leaving, the fear of him no longer tabernacling over us, the fear of us not being able to be in his presence is gone, because his glory will be there with us forever, never to be removed. And so we see in verse 11, the glory of God, her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Now, those things don't really compute for us because we tend to think of jasper as some of a kind of an opaque sort of stone. And we're not quite sure if they're talking about a different form of jasper that we might not be familiar with, or just the preciousness of jasper. And that it's almost for us as precious as diamonds would be to us today. The glory of God, this beautiful thing shining through all of his eternity in this new city, this new Jerusalem, as he dwells with us. Now we get into some of the fun stuff. Now we get into some of the dimensions, okay? Now, I am not an architect. I can tell you that much. I have a story to tell you about how much not of an architect I am here in a few moments. But we get some of the dimensions here. And again, we're using sort of our modern language and thinking to kind of fill some of these dimensions, but there's general agreement for literal interpretation about how large this place is going to be. So let's look in verse 12. It says also she had also she had a great and high wall with 12 gates, 12 angels at the gates, names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west. Now the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. He who talked with me had a gold reed to measure the city, its gates and its wall. The city is laid out as a square. Its length is as great as its breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. Its length, breadth, and height are equal. Then he measured its wall, 144 cubits, according to the measure of man, that is, of an angel. So he's laying out the dimensions of this city, and he speaks of it as really a perfect cube. Its length is as its expanse, its width, its breadth is as the same and equal to its height, its length. So it's all dimensions here are the same. And if we look at what's given to us here, we're talking about roughly about 1,500 miles length, width, and height. This very large place, this very expansive cube that is being discussed here for us. It tells us here that a reed is being used to measure this golden reed, probably about 10 feet long. And then it talks about these furlongs, and it says there's 12,000 furlongs, and its length, breadth, and height are all equal. Now, a furlong for us is roughly about 660 feet. If you're familiar with horse racing, they talk about furlongs. It could have been a little bit different, again, in times when this was written, the stadia being used instead. But you're talking about roughly 660 feet. And you have 12,000 of those. So that equals 7.92 million feet, which is the equivalent of roughly 1,500 miles. It's going to be a very large space. To put this in perspective for you, here's a picture of what that would look like taking over part of the United States. There's a 1,500-mile area, and that is ultimately what's described as just the capital, the city, the New Jerusalem. People are always concerned about how will everybody be able to fit in that area. I promise you, we will fit just fine in that area. Think about how densely even the United States is populated, and looking at this picture and seeing how expansive this area is going to be. Not only that, but we're also given some descriptions about its wall, and we see that its wall is going to be roughly 216 feet tall. That's what's given here when it talks about the cubit height being about 18 inches, that measurement being from about the elbow to the tip of your middle finger. And so we're talking about walls that are around 216 feet high. But we also have to think about this in terms of this 1,500-mile sort of area, is that it's also described as that perfect cube. So it's not just the expanse of it, it's also the height of it. The New Jerusalem will also be 1,500 miles high. That's pretty tall. Let me do my best to put that into perspective for you. The Statue of Liberty, how many of you have ever seen the Statue of Liberty in person? All right, Statue of Liberty is 305 feet tall, okay? It would take 259,672 Statue of Liberties stacked on top of each other to give us the height of this new city. It's going to be massive. And one of the things that people struggle with as they talk about this as well, is this symbolic? Is this really literal? Because we can't comprehend this in terms of our modern day sort of earth and our modern day sort of living. But remember, God has made all things what? New. So in the new heavens and the new earth, this of course would be possible. And however he's going to establish it and however he's going to create it, I'm sure that there are some symbolic meanings and understandings behind this, but I think as we've read much of the rest of this book of Revelation, these characteristics are meant to be taken literally. That it's going to be an expansive place. There will be plenty of room, plenty of area for all of God's people to live as he dwells among us. And remember, this is just one city. This is just one place. It's not even speaking to the rest of the new heavens and the new earth, which God has prepared for us. So we see the size of it. And again, these walls being nearly 216 feet tall. Now, a question that comes to mind as we look at this text is we see all of these walls, we see these gates, but we also see 12 angels standing at the gates. And some people tend to think, well, what's the purpose of having angels? Why would they be? Are they guarding posts? What's the purpose of having walls? Walls are typically meant to be for defense. Are we worried about people coming in and attacking us in eternity? Well, that can't be, because it says there's no death, no sorrow, no pain, no all those things. So that can't be the case. Sin and unbelief has been taken out of the way. But I think here these walls and these angels are a continual reminder, just as we'll have many reminders as we continue to study these things, of God's everlasting protection over us. It's not that we are worried about attack coming in, but it's a sign and a reminder that God is always going to protect his own. He is going to keep us. He's going to persevere us. He's going to help us as we continue on. And even in eternity, I think it's shown in the reminders of how this new capital city is established for us. So these angels at the gates, the walls themselves, it's all there in terms of showing us who God is, his faithfulness, and his protection over us. We also see these different aspects of the city. We see, first of all, its gates. Again, look what it says here in verse 12. It says, also she had a great and high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates, and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And then I think here, these are literal gates, but I also think here part of the meaning behind them is signifying the restoration of Israel. All that which they had hoped for, all that which they're promised, all that they had understood in the promises of being with God forever and always being God's people and being made right with God and him dwelling and tabernacling with them is realized in eternity. They are finally there. They have the land they're promised. They have the area that they have. It's continued in eternity. We have it fulfilled through the millennial kingdom and ongoing age upon age. And so here we see this continued distinction. Its gates, the coming and going out of this city, we have the names of the 12 tribes written. And so again, I think it's significant not only of their distinction, but also of their restoration and their part in eternity. We see also this, we see the foundation. It goes on in verse 14, and it says, the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. This would be the founders of the church. I think, again, this signifies in some way the completion of the church. That we also, just like Israel is restored, we are now with God forever, where he is dwelling over us. He's among us. He's tabernacling with us. Christ is there with us. We will see him face to face. And the building of this city, the foundation of it ultimately is the church, is these apostles, is the teachings and the progression and the meaning of the church, and all that God has worked in the program of his church is at the foundation of this new Jerusalem. Again, we continue to see the distinction, but we also see how these things work together. We're all inhabiting this land. We're all there in this new Jerusalem. We're all enjoying the presence of God in eternity forever. It's a wonderful thought as we think of all the promise that lies ahead for this. You know, the gates also signify, I think, the meaning of our coming and going. One of the questions that has come to mind is are we just going to be stuck in this city? I mean, 1,500 miles large and then high is a pretty big area to explore anyways. But some people think, are we just going to be stuck there? But gates would signify that we are able to come in and out. And again, I think that goes well with the exploring aspect of enjoying the new heavens and new earth that God has created for us. But we see how expansive this place is going to be. But then we also see its beauty. We're given a very detailed description of so many different stones which are described to talk about some of the beauty that the city is adorned with. And again, much of this we really don't understand, and there could be a difference between what he is seeing in this new heavens and new earth to how we understand it now. So we simply would know that this is unparalleled to anything that we really know today. But here in verse 17, he begins to talk about some of the the beauty of this place. He says he measured its wall 140 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of an angel. The construction of its wall was of jasper. And again, this, we tend to think of this sort of opaque look, but it's probably much different than what we would think of. It says the city was pure gold, like clear glass. Everyone loves gold, right? We all want gold, 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 gold. You got all these TV shows about gold mining. You ever watch, what is that one? History Channel. It's been playing for like 1,000 years. Where they're Oak Island. Anyone ever watch Oak Island, right? Yeah. They haven't found anything. All I want is gold, right? They keep digging this. Everyone goes for it. When I was metal detecting, all I ever wanted to find was gold, right? And I know Igor Chernich have planted coins in my yard, but I sold my metal detector. So somewhere in my yard, there might be gold. I don't know, right? We all want gold. We want these wonderful things. Well, guess what? This whole city is covered in gold. It's this conveying this idea of it's this beauty, of its majesty, of the most precious thing you can think of. This city's just covered in it. I mean, it talks about its streets being of gold. What do we use now for streets? We use asphalt. It stinks, it's dark, it's black, it's ugh, right? Gold's going to be so just whatever in the new heavens and earth. They're paving streets with it, right? This whole sense of just how wonderful, how majestic, how beautiful this new heavens and earth is going to be. It says the foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper. The second was sapphire, which would be blue in its color. It says the third was chalcedony, which would be blue, another kind of blue mixed with some other colors. The fourth was emerald, which we think of as that bright green. Any Wizard of Oz fans here? Emerald City, right? That sort of bright green that you think of when you hear that. It says the fifth is sardonyx, which would be a red and a white sort of color. The sixth would be sardius, which is a ruby red type of color. The seventh would be chrysolite, which would be a golden in color. And then we get to beryl, which would be an aqua green color. Topaz, which would be yellow in color. Chrysoprase, which would be a greenish color. Jacinth, which would be purple or violet in color. And then amethyst, which would be another sort of purple in color. Now, you have all of these precious stones and all of these precious sort of gems, and these are just the colors which are used to describe all of this. And again, I don't think we can really fathom what this is going to be like. But what we also know is that the glory of God is shining through this whole place. We'll see that in a couple of weeks, how God's glory is there. There's no need for any other exterior light. There's no need for a sun. There's no need for stars, because the light comes from the glory of God as it pulses through all of eternity in this new home. And with the beauty of the city and all of its adornments and all of its jewels and all of its gems and all these wonderful colors, you can just begin to think about how majestic it's going to look. You ever hold up a diamond or something to a light, and you just see how it sparkles and how it glows with all sorts of different colors? That's going to be compared to this. All of the beauty that God has given, all of the wonders of all of these things which are here written for us, is just a taste of the unparalleled beauty that is going to come. God is not going to give us something which is second best. What he has prepared for us in eternity is best and will be forever and ever. We see also, as it continues on here, it says, verse 21, the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each individual gate was of one pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, like transparent glass. What a vision of what is to come. But I think most importantly, we see its promise. How does this all apply to us? How do we kind of go from here and take this? We see the promise of what is laid ahead for us. We see it realized even today. Turn to Hebrews chapter 11, if you would, here as we close. It's good to know all of what is to come, but there is a far greater principle for us to learn here. Hebrews chapter 11, I'm going to start reading here in verse 1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For it by the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. the essence of faith. We have to trust that what God says is true. We know that they're true. We know that there is a rightness to them, a truth of them. There's evidence of them, but it's evidence of things that we don't yet see. So we have faith to trust that there is ultimately these promises coming, which God has given us in His Word. And it says in verse 4, all these aspects of faith and going through all these different people who had faith and all what they were looking forward to. It says, by faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it he, being dead, still speaks. By faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death, and was not found because God had taken him. But before he taken, he had his testimony that he pleased God. But without faith it's impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So we continue to see these examples of faith. There has to be faith. There's this evidence of faith. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. A trust in God that what he says was going to come true, and his acting thereon. And then we come to Abraham. And it says in verse 8, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in the land of promises in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him, the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. That is this city. That even from as early as Abraham and before, the promise of eternity was there. That there is a city which is coming. There's a promise, Abraham, which is coming. And whether he fully realized it or not, that promise was not something which is going to happen in his earthly life, but it was going to be carried out and given into eternity. Its foundations which are from God, whose builder and maker is God. This is the new Jerusalem. This is the new heavens. This is the new earth. This is what the expectation was. This is what he was hoping for. It goes on, it says, verse 11, by faith Sarah herself also received strength, conceived seed, bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful and had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky, in a multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they who saw such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. It is so tough sometimes for us to continue to endure in this Christian life and think that there is something out there to look forward to. I promise you, retiring and moving to Florida with your white shoes is not heaven. Okay? It's not. John Piper gave this sermon about don't waste your life, which spurred the book and everything else. And he was reading a story from the Reader's Digest about this couple who worked their whole life to work as hard as they can so they could retire and collect seashells. And he gave this whole thing about how stupid, how wasteless is that you're wasting, that you collect seashells. We think that we're working our whole life towards retirement. We think that we're working our whole life towards being able to relax. We think that we're working our whole life to some place that we can go, relax for a little bit, grow old, see some grandkids, and then die. No. There is something which is so greater. There is something which here is described as so much better. There is something which is coming that we can look forward to, which God has made for us. That is a promise which is there for us, which is coming for us, which is not temporary, but is eternal. And it is so much better than anything you will ever find here. There is a new heavens and a new earth, a new city which is coming. And that promise needs for us to be realized today. Because that heavenly hope, that realization of that there is something far beyond this life, that there is a heavenly home, that is where I truly belong, that I am genuinely a stranger right here, because this is not what God ultimately has for me, because there is an eternity ahead where He has already had a home prepared. That knowledge, that realization for us should drastically change the way that we live. You can wake up every single morning with whatever sickness, whatever illness. You can wake up every single morning no matter who's the president of the United States, no matter what the country looks like, no matter who's at war with who, because God is on the throne and there's a heavenly hope coming. We can endure every single step of life as we hold on to this hope. There is something far better coming. And until then, we're strangers, pilgrims in this land. But where does it begin? Faith. Do you really believe it? Do you really trust it? That when either Christ returns or death comes and your eyes close, that what lies ahead is the true promise of eternity with God. What a joy. What a hope that we have. A new home, a better home. Have faith. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word, and we thank you for the promise of what is to come. Lord, I know it is so difficult for us as we're so wrapped up in our finite thinking, we're so wrapped up in our day-to-day life and all of what we're enduring and all of what is coming that we can lose sight of eternity. There's always a fine balance for us to have, Lord, and I pray that you'd help us with it. We don't want to be so eternally minded that we're no earthly good, but we don't want to be so earthly minded that we're no eternally good. But help us not to lose heart. Help us to strive each and every day. Help us to pick ourselves up and to trust and to rely in you and to grow in your wisdom every single day, because there is something coming. There is something better. There is something greater. There is something unlike we even have the smallest taste of knowing today. Father, what you have prepared for us is beyond any aspect of this imagination. The best things that we can think of, the greatest things that we can think of, even when it comes to how much we desire some of these stones and gold and all these things, in heaven and eternity, it's just a foretaste of what is to come. So, Father, help us to cling to that heavenly hope. Help us to trust and to never lose faith, the substance of things which we hope for, and the evidence of things not seen. But Father, praise be to you that there is coming a day where faith will be made sight. We will see you face to face, and we will see all of the glory which you have in store for us. Father, thank you for the promise of these new heavens, these new earth, and this new city, which we will be at home and where you will dwell with us forever. And we ask it in your Son's name. Amen. Thank you. You are dismissed.